Welcome back to the Jessica Ash Wellness YouTube channel, coming to you with another episode of the Fully Nourished podcast. I'm Jessica Ash. I'm a functional nutritionist and integrative health coach. And this podcast is really my platform to take a scientific and spiritual look at why everywhere you look, it seems like women are so deeply burned out, almost on a soul level. And I want to just explore what it looks like to reclaim our feminine vitality and become fully nourished in a world that seems so desperate to dull us down. And with that being said, as a reminder, everything in this podcast is for education and inspiration only and is not intended as medical advice. So please talk to the appropriate professional when necessary. And please also use common sense before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle. So I have been sipping on pretty much all summer long, but especially over the past couple of weeks, this delicious beverage. I like to add sparkling water to juice and different drinks. And so I recently rediscovered kombucha, which I feel like I went through so much kombucha there for a second that I didn't ever want to look at it or see it again. And then I kind of feel like I rediscovered it a little bit, but in a new way. I don't feel like drinking it straight probably ever again, but blending it with a little bit of sparkling water and the juice of like a lime or a lemon is a really refreshing, delicious drink. You can also add minerals to it or other things, but I don't always do well on like straight juice or straight kombucha. So having it a little bit watered down is the perfect way to hydrate, especially when it's hot outside and you don't feel like just drinking straight water, but you also don't feel like drinking like milk or bone broth or those types of things. You want something that's like a little lower calorie. That is my drink of choice. And I had a friend visiting this weekend. I turned her on to that because she was like, oh, that's good. I'm taking that back with me. And then I also turned her on to, I've been making this granola lately that is just like really easy to snack on. It's really good. I'll do 2 cups of sprouted oats, the 1 Degree Organics, I think is the name. And then I'll do a cup of shredded coconut flakes, like not the like really shreds, but the more fancy type shreds, the bigger type shreds. I guess they would be called maybe shavings, something like that. And then I'll cut up a few dates, like maybe 5 to 10 dates, depending on their size, and just like cut them into small pieces, put them in there. I'll do a little bit of some chocolate chips, like a handful of dark chocolate chips, handful of white chocolate chips. And then I'll put in 1/4 a cup of coconut sugar, 1/4 a cup of maple syrup, and about like 1/3 cup to 1/2 cup of coconut oil, and then a little vanilla and a little cinnamon. And I'll just put that on a baking sheet and bake it at about 325 for around 20 minutes or until it gets kind of golden brown. And then take it out of the oven, just let it sit for a second so it can be kind of clustered together, and then just kind of break it down into chunks. But she thought it was very delicious, and it has been very delicious. I've probably made it like 6 times in the past 3 weeks. It's just a nice little snack that I like to snack on. You can add protein powder. I have added protein powder, both casein and whey, and it kind of changes the flavor a little bit. But if you're looking to add some protein, that's pretty good. I just eat it with lower fat Greek yogurt, and that's kind of my protein with it. But one activity we did was we went to a spa. I had a gift certificate, so I was like, let's just go to a spa. I'd never been to like a fancy spa where you like pay for a treatment and then you go in and you have access to all the facilities. Like you can have shower facilities, and there's a steam room, and there was a sauna, and there was this like indoor jacuzzi, and just like regular spa-ish things. And the one thing going into it that they told us was you can't bring any outside food or drink. I feel like that's kind of pretty typical for a spa. And they said that they'll provide snacks. And I'm like, well, okay, let's see what type of snacks they provide. Because fully nourished babes need a little bit of a different type of snackage than what's considered quote unquote healthy snacks. So I didn't have high expectations, but I'm still just sometimes so shocked at how undernourishment just seeps into every area of our culture. Like you could go a whole day, be locked into somewhere for like, 8 hours, and you could subsist off of, a few little grapes, a few little pieces of fruit, a little nuts, I think they had like tea and coffee and water, and like these little like muffins that were full of chia seeds. So I knew that they were probably like, blech. And then nuts, I think I mentioned that. And I'm like, well, I don't necessarily want to snack on all this stuff today. Like I'm hungry. I need sustenance. So thankfully we were able to go to a different facility and like order a cheeseburger. But I think back to when 5 years ago, 7 years ago, when I still had such a rocky relationship with both my body and food. And I definitely wouldn't have eaten anything there. Like I wouldn't have felt comfortable with it. I would have been like, oh, I'm just going to fast or I'm just going to not eat. And I would have definitely thought that was better. I would have thought that was superior, even though now I'm just always so surprised still to this day of just how much better I function when I've had a full meal in me, even if the meal is not perfect. And yeah, sure, some stuff that we eat, our body's like, meh, I would have preferred maybe not to have that, but I would much rather function nourished. And sometimes we just have no choice. It's literally a choice between a super imperfect dish that we wouldn't normally choose or to not. But I think we're starting to see the tides turn that, oh, as a woman, I feel so much better when even if I didn't eat the most perfect thing. But yeah, it's always surprising to see what people think to be like healthy food, because I wouldn't really consider like snacking on nuts or like these weird kind of hodgepodge chia seeds muffins are the healthiest fare. I would have much preferred to see some more sustenance there. But alas, we still live in this world that's all turned upside down. So today's episode is kind of random. It's a little bit of a compilation of some questions and answers. I thought it was time to do a little bit of a Q&A type episode. We've had a few interesting comments come into the DMs that I thought would make some good conversation. And it looks like they might start some thought-provoking discussion. So I thought I would answer them today. I thought that would be kind of a fun and different format. It seems like, up until this point, I know I've talked about a lot of concepts that are maybe hard to grasp. And I haven't given a ton of, this is what we need to do about it, or this is the action step, because I think it's really important to just present information and then have you figure out what it means for you. It seems like we've got really used to a certain type of delivery of information as a society. And I definitely will say I'm guilty of it too, where it's like, okay, you gave me some information. Now tell me what to do about it. Like, give me action steps, break it down into X, Y, Z. Like we're kind of gotten to this point where it's like, okay, I guess I kind of agree with that. Now tell me what to do about it and I'll do it. And that is just as far from personal responsibility as we can get. We're so action oriented, which kind of like pushes the point that we as women are so stuck in this masculine type energy where we don't have to really, it's not as much about thinking about concepts and really marinating on them without coming to any conclusions very quickly, or coming to snap judgments. We kind of do have this mentality right now where it's like we are having to sift through information so quickly that the way that we consume information has really changed. And we sometimes, it seems like some of us, at least from some of the comments we've been getting, is that I'm actually seeing that women are kind of coming to these snap judgments of and putting words into my mouth that I haven't even said based on their own experiences and their own biases and their own emotions, kind of clouding their ability to see what I'm saying clearly. So just as a reminder, I'm not really telling you what to do about it. My goal with this podcast is to start certain conversations, but by no means am I saying that I have the answer to everything, right? Like I'm not telling you what to do about it. This is really up to us as women, which is why I'm presenting these ideas, because these are things that I've kind of discovered within my work. And these are observations that I've made and things that I want to share, but by no means do I know what that actually implicates for each of us in our everyday lives. Every one of us has such a different life that it's up to us to kind of take these ideas in and then to really think about them and think about what they mean to us. But I do want to make sure that we clear up any like misconceptions and I can offer as much clarity as possible. But I'm just telling you honestly that some of these things are more ideas and perspectives, but they're not necessarily action steps. And I think for some of us, it's like very difficult to accept that because it's like, tell me what to do about it. And that's where I think we've gotten part of that soul deep burnout we're exploring that I mentioned in the trailer of this podcast, is that we keep consuming ideas and information, but they don't change how we approach our life. And we're just trying to find the quick or the tip or the trick or the hack that's going to change things. And what I'm trying to do is present you some ideas and perspectives that maybe you've never thought about before that are maybe impacting your health more than you realize. That's all. And what that means for us, well, it's up to us as a collective of women to define that. It might mean something a little bit differently for me than it means for you. So diving into, there's just a couple of questions today. They're a little bit longer discussions, but I really enjoy getting the feedback and just hearing your perspectives and takes, which is why I'm sharing these things. And I'm hoping that we can kind of move forward together, opening up the conversation even bigger so that we can start to really contemplate what this means for our lives. So the first question is along the lines of kind of femininity and living within our rhythms. And I think she poses a few different really good questions. So she said, first, I want to say that I love your podcast and have learned a lot about myself from listening to it, including this one. I think she was talking about episode 5, which was the talk about masculinity versus femininity and feminine physiology versus male physiology. She says, I find this episode really interesting and a little naive, so I'd love to get your thoughts on it. It sounded like you were suggesting that a woman need to follow their natural rhythms and balance, but outside of a few situations in history, such as American housewife during the economic boom of the mid-1900s, which was alluded to several times, this was never possible. I'm not from the US and grew up in a culture that is much more representative of what most people would have lived like, largely subsistence farming, limited technology and conveniences, life with nuclear family, etc. The work that everyone had to do was many times harder than working any stressful corporate job, and balance and self-care isn't even a concept that exists if you follow your rhythms and don't spend 5 hours doing laundry by hand. No matter how you feel, your baby won't have anything clean to sleep in type of situation, or the family won't have enough food. I have a baby now and it's 110% give. My body might be falling apart from exhaustion, but I can't tell a 6-month-old that mommy needs a chill break because she's trying to honor her hormonal cycles and find balance. And I can afford help, don't work, a housekeeper, and so on. I can only imagine the stress that many women who have to work due to financial stress multiple kids need to face. I think what would be more helpful are suggestions on how to support themselves when they can't find balance, because this scenario is much more applicable to most of the women out there. So I totally understand where this question is coming from, and I think there's a lot to address within it. There's some great points that I want to address. And the first one really, where she says, I find this episode really interesting and a little naive, so I'd love to get your thoughts on it. It sounded like you were suggesting that a woman need to follow their natural rhythms and balance. But then she kind of mentions that, she says, I can't tell a 6-month-old that mommy needs a chill break because she's trying to honor her hormonal cycles and find balance. And so I think that some of us have let other people define what self-care and balance and honoring our hormonal rhythms is. And I am under the big belief that we as women have been really manipulated by social media to define these things for us. We see a woman on social media who's cycle syncing or who's, showing that her self-care is like taking a bath and having quiet time with a book. Like, that is finding balance, and that is living within your hormonal rhythms. I don't know who created that definition, because finding balance and living within our hormonal rhythms is going to be different for all of us. And the idea that, all of these women are living out of balance, I'm aware of that. And that's really why I'm doing this podcast, is because there are plenty of people out there already helping women who are living so outside of their natural rhythms and so outside of what they need to be doing or what their bodies are feeling, that all they can do is kind of just like cater to this imbalanced system and do the best they can. But that conversation's already been being had. And so what the conversation I'm trying to start really is, what is living within your natural rhythms and balance actually mean? What does it actually mean? Is it the definition that so many social media influencers are showing us, where you just kind of lounge around, you don't really have much to do, when you have your period, you just kind of lay around all day? Or is it something deeper? And through this question, I think this can be a great representation, just this question alone. I think, the woman who asked this is not alone in kind of having some preconceived notions about what femininity means in regards to work. I think that a lot of us believe that femininity means not working. I don't know where we kind of equated the idea of not working to femininity, or the fact that to practice self-care, we need to be not working. I think that a lot of us, I think many women can agree that we are working, quote unquote, working all of the time. But I guess that really depends on what you define as work. If you define work as going somewhere and receiving a paycheck, then that's going to be very different than when your mind is always moving, you're always doing something, you're always accomplishing something. I define work as something that accomplishes something for a greater good. And there's many different types of work out there, right? And I think a lot of us have this deep underlying belief that the work that we do, if it doesn't result in us getting handed a paycheck, is not work, or is not good enough, or is not like the equivalent of a career or something like that. But this really reminds me that we as women have to define work, because I think a lot of women, no matter if you are working more of a career, or if you are working at home, or the many shades of gray in between, are working all of the time. There's a mental labor to being a woman as much as there is a physical labor. And most of the women that I know, including myself, don't ever really feel comfortable not accomplishing something. We're almost always accomplishing, even if it's just tiny things like doing laundry, or, dusting, or we see something in the house like, oh, we got to put a trash bag in the trash can, or whatever it might be. It's like we're always doing something. So I do not stand by the fact that living within our femininity means not working, because unfortunately we have to work to survive. Whether some of us are working to live, like the people that you mentioned, like your relatives that are having to do subsistence farming and do the laundry, or if it's showing up at a career. And I don't necessarily think that it's up to us to define what is harder. If this is harder versus this is harder, they're both their own type of hard. And the reason why I mentioned the American housewife was not to kind of idealize it. The reason that I continue to mention this, like American housewife of the early 1900s to 1950s, is it's a great example of how I see how, and I think mostly I'm seeing it from the perspective of the trad wife movement right now is kind of picking up, and I'm seeing women kind of fantasize and idealize this lifestyle of like staying home and baking bread and dressing a certain way and wearing dresses and things like that. And they think that that is the definition of what femininity is. And so the reason I bring up the American housewife is because I think it's a great example of how you could have, quote unquote, all the attributes of what society would define as femininity. You're like wearing the dresses and the aprons, and you're cooking and you're baking and you're in the kitchen all the time and you're taking care of the kids. And yet on the inside, you're so miserable and so resentful and so suppressed. Your freedoms are suppressed because you can't live within your body. You have to disassociate in order to get through and really enjoy your life. I think, that was really the time when women, as we went over in the last episode, like that was the time when women, quote unquote, wanted to be liberated. So they obviously were not happy with where they were at. And so I think right now we're kind of under this danger, or I don't necessarily want to call it danger, but we have a lot of women fantasizing about kind of going back in time, and that was a better time, like that was good time. And I don't think women were very happy there at all. There was a kind of suppression to women. Women had to act a certain way, be a certain way, dress a certain way, function a certain way within society, or they would be shunned. And to me, that was really the beginning of the time, like kind of the beginning of the end with why we as women are here now. I mean, look around how many women right now are kind of stuck in that cycle of quote unquote healing trauma. And so many women right now don't know how to nurture themselves. They don't know how to mother themselves, because that American housewife, that time was really the time when moms started to emotionally check out. That's where I love the book Mother Hunger by Kelly McDaniel, where she talks about we as women require mothering to learn how to nurture and mother ourselves. That is really our first feminine relationship that we have, that is that real connection where someone is there to guide you and grow you and challenge you and help you to rise and be who you are. And I look around right now and I think most of us in this generation, whether the American housewife was our mother, some of us that are listening are a little older, so that was our mother. And then for some of us, that was our grandmother. And that was really the beginning of this kind of disconnection and disassociation from who we really were. I mean, obviously it happened before that, but right now I look around and see a generation of women who are so hungry for nurturance and guidance. And we have absolutely no idea how to take care of ourselves because we were never taught. We don't know, we don't even have a strong sense of self because for most of us, and I'm not speaking for all of us because some of us had really emotionally present mothers who were in their bodies and weren't disassociated and weren't kind of victims of their own trauma. Some of us did have those mothers, but a lot of us did not. And that is really what has led us to where we're at today. So I use that analogy a lot because I think it's like kind of a great representation of the kind of right now our generation is a great representation of the consequences of what went on during that time. But by no means am I idealizing it. I don't believe there's been a time in history where we as women have been free to live within the rhythms of our body. I don't believe that there has been a time, maybe a long time past, maybe thousands of years ago, when women's bodies were respected and there was a more maybe matriarchal society. But I don't actually believe that there has been a time where women have been allowed or open or able to really truly grasp what it means to live within their biological rhythms. And I don't think that living within your biological rhythms means working when you want to and not when you don't want to. It's not just doing what we feel like doing all the time. I think in a lot of ways, women almost do more work or different type of work. We have a lot of mental work and labor that we have to do a lot. Just because femininity is maybe slower and softer and gentler doesn't mean it's not resilient. In fact, sometimes soft things are more resilient than hard things. Hard things can shatter, whereas softness sometimes does mean resilience. So being a generator of energy doesn't mean like, oh, I'm just going to lounge around while my body generates energy. No, it's just an understanding that our body functions differently. And my hope is that the awareness of your own rhythms and the awareness of your physiology helps you make different choices or maybe approach yourself differently and see yourself differently from a different perspective. I do believe that because of social media and maybe even hustle culture, we've got this idea in our head that self-care and balance is always found in the not working or not doing something. But in my opinion, it's actually that, if we really work to practice self-care and self-compassion, we will be always in an effort to find purpose and fulfillment within the work, within what life requires us to do to survive. That if we are living in alignment, we will be choosing work that feels so purposeful and fulfilling that no matter how hard it may get or how difficult it is, it feels like it's satisfying and nourishing to us. And that really is not always just the type of work we're doing, but it's also how we're showing up in the work. And so my hope is that as we start to learn about our physiology more and we really start to open these conversations of what does living in our feminine energy look like and feel like, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're always going to be able to change our life circumstances, that we're going to always be able to just switch careers or change our job or like you said, you have a 6-month-old that you have to show up for and give. But living within our femininity allows us to show up and do that work differently, to not put so much pressure on ourselves to perform, to allow ourselves to be in the present moment and experience what we're experiencing, knowing that it's probably going to be temporary and we're not always going to feel this way. And if we're doing something hard and we're having to show up day after day and do something hard, because let's face it, life can be extremely hard. And each person's definition of hard is different based on their biases, their experiences, their upbringing. If we're living within alignment, then that hard is going to grow us. It's going to challenge us to grow more. So that doesn't necessarily mean that, every cycle we're going to be able to, I'm on my period, mommy's out, or, checked out. Like, life is still there. Life is still life. And every woman does live a little bit differently. Some women have way more privileges than others. But if we're all being honest, largely our world as we know it is really a representation that all of us are in bondage to the systems that we're born into. So no matter, your examples were, no matter if you're the woman back home who has to do 5 hours of laundry so that her child has clean clothes, or you're the woman that now has to work a career that feels soul-sucking to her because you have to in order to survive and make the living that you want to make. As of right now, with the system where it is, we are all working to survive. But the patterns that I'm seeing is that survival and working to live and running a rat race is not what our physiology or our biology was originally made for. What the answer to that is, I don't know. What the solution to that is, I don't know. I'm hoping that maybe we as women can start using our imaginative vision that we possess, start thinking outside the box, beyond our reality, beyond our limited perspective based on our biases and our experiences and our upbringing, start to really learn about our bodies, our physiology, our needs, and that will kind of start to have a ripple effect to help us kind of see beyond this reality and look beyond and start maybe asking questions of how can we change things as a whole to make it easier for all of us as a whole so we can live within our rhythms. Is it possible? I think anything is possible. Why do we have to be stuck in the system? Why can't we see beyond it? But my answer to the question, or at least what it comes down to now that my rant is over, is really that I think we've gotten the idea in our head because of social media and just, I think, maybe almost the media itself, movies and books and things like that. We kind of have let somebody else define the vision for us. And that includes what balance and self-care means. I think the ultimate form of self-care is to set up a life that allows you to fulfill your purpose and feel nourished and fulfilled. And even if it takes so much work to get there, it might actually take a lot more sacrifice and be quote unquote hard, but easy never got us anything good in life. And so I don't know where this idea kind of permeated that balance and self-care is just kind of lounging around and doing whatever you want. I think it's sometimes very much the opposite. So to whoever asked this question, I just want to say, and if you're listening, I just want to say thank you so much for opening up that conversation. I really appreciate your feedback and I just appreciate your perspective. So this next question has been asked by multiple people in multiple different ways. So I just pulled one kind of thread of questions out, but we've had many of you ask similar questions. So this is kind of for all of you as a whole. It piggybacks perfectly off of the last statement in the last question, which was, I think what would be more helpful are suggestions on how to support themselves when they can't find balance, because this scenario is much more applicable to most of the women out there. And then the question that is now being asked is, do you think there's a way to be a professional working woman who must work on a man's schedule and still be fully nourished, traveling a lot, etc.? Any posts for that specifically would be amazing. Sometimes it feels like the pro-metabolic accounts are aimed only at the stay-at-home moms. And then this thread continues, do you create any content that would fit for professional working women who don't have the option to not fit into the man's world? Meaning, like, sometimes I purposefully don't read content like yours or other pro-metabolic because it feels like very helpless. I'm taking international flights at 5 a.m. and I can only do so much, And so I think this question, it was asked by many different people, so I'm not picking on one person. And I think this is a really great question to ask. And I think it really opens up a bigger conversation. And I think the first thing that it opens up is I'm going to turn that question right back around at you. If you're asking these types of questions, this is where you need to turn the question back on yourself and ask yourself, what does it mean to be fully nourished to you? What does being fully nourished mean to you? Because my guess is that if you're interested in health information, you're maybe struggling with your health, or you're trying to find balance within your health. And so the first thing to define for yourself is, what are you looking for? What are your goals? Because this isn't actually a question that I can answer for you fully. I can give you guidance and I can give you some perspective, but nobody is in your life quite like you, and nobody is in your body quite like you. And so you know how much you've tried, right? You know all of the effort that you've taken. You know where you're at, and you know where you want to go. And it's up to you to define and figure out if it's possible for you to continue to live the way you do, have the lifestyle that you have, and be able to reach your goals. And a great representation of that is, you said you're doing the best you can. You can only do so much, And so if you're completely accepting that you're doing all that you can and you've done everything that you can possible to support your health, then what is what kind of gives? My question would be, are you in alignment? Do you feel good? Does your current lifestyle require you to sacrifice? What does it require you to sacrifice? All of us have to make sacrifices, whether we're mothers, whether we're career women, whether we're entrepreneurs, whether, whatever we do, there's always sacrifices, right? In anything in life, there's a give and there's a take, right? We have to decide for ourselves, are we willing to live with these sacrifices? Because yes, then we're making a conscious choice. We're aware of it. And we're saying, these are the sacrifices I must make in order to get here. And I'm willing to make those sacrifices. But are we willing to live with the consequences of those sacrifices? Whether that is the mental consequences, the emotional consequences, or the physical consequences. And no one can really define that for you. Like, I might look and say, I wouldn't really want to make that sacrifice because sleep is really important to me, and being able to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner is really important to me. Those are like boundaries that I just have that I don't want crossed, and I can't survive well and live the life that I want to live if I can't do those things. Whereas somebody else might be very willing to make those sacrifices and not really care. But an underlying theme that I'm getting, because this is not the only question like this has been asked, is kind of like there's a little bit of a resentment that other people have made different choices or are living in a little bit of a different season of life. And I do feel like the pro-metabolic community is very much dominated by a lot of women who are stay-at-home moms. I mean, I am not a stay-at-home mom. That's the funniest part, is like, I work pretty much a full-time, what you would consider a full-time job. There have been times in my life where I've been working 120 hours a week, where I live, breathe, sleep, work. Like, all I'm doing is sleeping, eating, and working. So I understand that there's a time and a place for it, but I have learned thus far that I cannot survive. That is, to me, just survival. It's not life. It doesn't feel like living. It feels soul-sucking to me. When I'm living like that, I can't feel at peace. I don't feel in alignment. I have to often disassociate from my body just to survive. I'm not breathing deeply. I'm numb to a lot of areas in my body. My body screams at me. I don't sleep well. And so I see those symptoms as my body saying, like, hey, we can't sustain this for a long time. There have been plenty of times in my life where I have to make sacrifices and push through, but I always come to the acceptance that I'm not going to be able to do this forever. And to survive and to really take care of myself and practice that self-care, the steps I need to take is to get out of the place that I'm in now. But those are the conclusions I had to come to over and over again, because I've kept trying different diets and different supplements and different this and different that. There was only so much I could do. There's only so many adaptogens you can take. You can only eat so healthy. You can only do so many things, especially if you're very busy all the time. And if it's not enough, it's not that you're not enough. It's not that you aren't doing enough. It's that something in your life isn't working. And so the bottom line to questions like this is, I cannot define that for you. I cannot define what it means for you to live fully nourished. Are you fulfilled? Are you at peace? Are you in alignment? I have seen and worked with women who can sustain a lot. I'm talking a lot of stress for long periods of time. I've worked with plenty of women that are a little bit, they're more seasoned in their career, like mid 40s, early 50s, and they've worked a really hard career. They're, most of their lives, and lots of traveling, lots of pressure, lots of kind of having to like suppress parts of yourself to kind of live within a more like this commenter said, like in a man's world. I don't like defining it that way, because I feel like as of now, society and the pressure even on men, I mean, women too, but even on men is too much. Like our bodies are not made to just work to survive. Like we should have leisure time. We should have time to rest. We should have time to play. We should have time outside. I mean, just if you look at like all of our basic biological needs, we should be able to live lives where we are meeting our biological needs. That should be kind of a basic privilege, but that's not really where everything is right now, because we live within a system that really values the corporation or values the system over the individual. And the only way that's going to change is if we start actively defining what our boundaries are and not letting people cross them. And that's where that kind of trust and surrender comes in. But, going back to understanding our nature and exploring femininity, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have to say like, nope, I have to live in my feminine energy, so I cannot do that. It goes back to the question I answered before, which is it's not always about the type of work, it's how we're showing up in the work. And there is a point, I think, for everybody, and every body is different, that we're just pushing our body beyond the brink and we're treating it like a robot, and our bodies unfortunately are just not robots. They don't function like robots. So there's not like a quantifiable amount of rest that we need in order to recover and like keep going, keep going like the robots we are. It's more of, there's certain people that get so burned out that they need years of rest to be able to get back to their previous amount of workload. So I've kind of gone on a tangent, but that's a long way of saying that when we ask questions like this, we need to define for ourselves, what is it that we're after, and what is it that we want, and what does a fully nourished life mean to us? And our body will really help us figure that out. How many of us have just been in situations where it's like, I push my body beyond the brink and it just can't sustain that for very long. And it lets us know through signs and symptoms. So to answer your question, I do think that we as women should prioritize basic nurturance or nourishment. I think that some basic things that we do need to function are 3 meals. I think we need to be pooping regularly and having space in our life where we're not so busy and tense and disassociated that we don't even get the urge to have bowel movements. I think, the reason I bring that up is because I see that a lot. I think we need to define what our basic needs for sleep are. I think there are some basic things that, if you're a professional working woman and you don't have the option to not fit into a man's world, using your own words, and you're taking international flights at 5 a.m., well, what is it that your body needs to be able to thrive in that place? And all the tips that people in the pro-metabolic community are giving you you can pick and choose. You can take certain things, leave the rest. You're going to have to probably get creative and kind of metamorphosizing and changing things to fit more into your schedule. But when we're stuck in that masculine energy, we're often so bound by perfection. And we also are very much in that comparison place, because masculine energy often brings competition. And so competition often brings comparison. And so we kind of feel like we don't even know how to live outside of that. We're constantly comparing our stuff to other people's stuff, but that's masculine energy in and of itself. There's a competition type energy there. So I would encourage you to take a step back. Don't put so much pressure on yourself. You're not trying to be perfect here. Just take some of the advice and leave the rest and try to do the best you can. Just like you said, you can only do so much, and then you got to get to a place of acceptance and just leave the rest. It's an intentional kind of let go and prioritization of, this is what I need for my peace. This is what I need for my sanity. This is what I need for my body to function well. Do those things and forget the rest. And that's where, no matter if you're a professional working woman or a stay-at-home mom or somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. We can always kind of get stuck in that rabbit hole of like, how does this apply to me? I'm much busier than her. She only has one kid, I have 7. Or, she doesn't have any kids and I have 3, and we kind of get into this comparison where that doesn't do anyone any good. It's just like, what is your life like? Figure out what works for you and what your needs are and forget the rest. Like leave it alone. But all of that requires us to define our goals for ourselves, because if we don't know where we're headed, or we don't know what we actually want, or we don't define what it means to be nourished, like what are we actually after, then it's going to be very difficult to find the habits that are going to help us get to where we want to go. So the third question that we got was, loved the episode. This was about episode 5 again. That seemed to be a crowd favorite. And she had asked, do I have any book recommendations on the feminine archetypes? We've gotten a few questions on, do I have any resources on the feminine and the masculine and all of that? And she had mentioned that she got the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover for her husband, but she wanted some more book recommendations on the feminine archetypes. And, it's really interesting because I have read a lot of these kind of masculine, feminine books, femininity books, divine masculine, divine feminine. And I've also explored a lot of these pages. There's a lot of pages on like Instagram and TikTok. I've explored some blogs. And, it's really interesting because a lot of the conclusions that I have made about masculinity and femininity have been along the realms of just me studying the hormones of male physiology and female physiology and their attributes, and also just studying areas in nature. I have really looked to tangible evidence to really start to define what those things are for me, which is where a lot of my conclusions are made. I've picked up a little bit along the way in regards to like kind of taking some of the archetypes and things to help teach it and to help break it down. But what you find is a lot of times within this space is there's a lot of kind of new agey, which to me, like new age is kind of its own religion in and of itself. And with that kind of brings this kind of almost, there's a like a detachment to it or a lack of meaning. And so I have not been able to find any great books on explaining the feminine archetypes. I've kind of gotten what's out there, read certain blog posts and watch videos, whatever I can kind of find on them. And then I kind of take that and meld it with my knowledge of physiology and biology. But what I would encourage you guys to do is, or you ladies to do, people get annoyed with me when I say you guys, is just to start thinking about things and defining what they mean for you and look for evidence wherever you're at. Look for evidence within your relationships or the people that you know, or even in nature. There is kind of evidence of this stuff all around us. And defining femininity can be really hard because if we're trying to define it with our, logical masculine side of our brain, we're kind of losing out. And it's something that we have to actually feel and walk through. And once we have a little bit of awareness about it, we could do all the studying we want about quantifying it and using data and observing it. But I would encourage you to work through it and feel through it, even if it feels really uncomfortable or imperfect. I think sometimes we get caught up in this idea, this like just desire for just more and more and more and more and more information. And there's sometimes only so much information we can take in before we have to really sit and marinate on these things. Some of my favorite books for understanding femininity a little bit more. The first one, I always mention it. It's Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Estes, or I think she puts her other name on there too, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. But I love that book because it uses story to teach. And I think that is, as I've learned over the years and really learned what type of things we as women really respond to, we don't always respond to the logical data as much as we do about the story. We need connection. We need some type of emotional connection there. And so I think learning through story can be really helpful. I also really like the book, The Optimized Woman by Miranda Gray. And there's a book, Wild Power. And I like that book as well. I have a few other books that I've added to my like Amazon storefront where I think I put like feminine growth books. And there were some books in there that were very masculine in nature, like the ones by Robert Greene. Like I like his book Mastery, Seduction, 48 Laws of Power, even Art of War. Sometimes to me, like studying things that are more masculine help me really see the feminine more clearly. I also think that a lot of times when I am learning or being taught about the divine feminine or the divine masculine, a lot of this stuff does not resonate. Like it feels really icky and you're like, nah, that's not true. That's not true. And I've had to wade through a lot of that. There's so many books that maybe I'll glean a little bit of information or a little bit of wisdom from, but a lot of it I just kind of like, that doesn't resonate. That doesn't resonate. That doesn't feel true. And to me, my research process is very much when I am trying to explore something, get to the truth of something, get to the root of it. I use my deep trust in my higher power, my deep trust in God to say, lead me to the answers, because within my belief system, I believe God is truth. So when I find God, my body knows it, right? Sometimes chills overtake my body, or there's just a deep kind of, the best way I could describe it is like, yep, that resonates. Like it penetrates to the very depth of my being. That absolutely makes sense. And I think most of us, when we discover real truth, we are immediately able to say, yes, that is absolutely true. And then there's times where our gut tells us like, that doesn't feel quite right. That doesn't feel quite right. And with the information overload that's out there right now, we've gotten to a place where we just kind of have gotten so flooded with information that we have so many different details and moving parts that we're having to wade through that we can't find a clear, true path. So with any research or with any trying to discover something more, or discover the heart of something or the truth of something, I just encourage you, if you put that intention out there and this is something I want to learn more about, this is something I want to discover, you're going to find that truth wherever you are. You don't have to necessarily always seek out, the perfect research study or the perfect book. Sometimes that stuff will come to you when you're watching a show or when you're watching a YouTube video or you're reading an article or just in the most random ways. You meet someone on the street and they share the puzzle piece that you were looking for. And so I don't have a ton of books and resources that I recommend, because a lot of them that I've gone through are like, I would probably not recommend this to people. But I feel like a lot of our nature is explained through how our body functions and through our physiology. And most of the conclusions that I've been sharing throughout the first couple of episodes have been really from just my deep study of hormone physiology and how our body really interacts with stress and those types of things. It's been and just how our body uses calories and energy. That is really where I have met the truth of what the feminine really is. But I love hearing your feedback. I want to hear more and more of what you're thinking about the podcast, what questions you still need answered, all of those things. You can just send it to us in a DM on Instagram or through our email, support@jessicaashwellness.com, because we're really trying to listen to what you want more of so that we can help you. And we know that a lot of you are craving some type of education or some type of action, like, okay, these things resonate, but what do I do about it? And we're trying to really hear from you and hear about what your challenges are and your current frustrations are so we can help do something like that for you. All right, so the fourth question is, and we're kind of moving beyond the feminine and masculine, and it's a little change of pace. And she asks, I would love to hear how changing to this more nourishing lifestyle and eating has been serving you lately. I know a lot of people have success with things immediately, but wondering what it has looked like for you long term with your past health issues, diagnoses, and how they show up or don't show up today. Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think, I have moved so far beyond. I talked a little bit more about this in episode 3. I've moved so far beyond the idea of a diet or restrictive style of eating. I started eating more quote unquote pro-metabolic, or what I teach in Fully Nourished. I would say just around really got into it 4 or 5 years ago, really fully committed. Before that, I was kind of jumping around from paleo and keto and carnivore, typically, because when I started to really feel horribly. Like when I was coming off the pill and I had all of my post-pill symptoms, I was diagnosed with like a plethora of different diagnoses. Like I had a lot of symptoms. I was being slapped with like prediabetes and PCOS and lupus and Hashimoto's and celiac disease. But bottom line was I had a lot of inflammation and I was very, very estrogen dominant. I was severely hypometabolic, meaning I was severely under functioning from a metabolic perspective and a thyroid perspective. My mitochondria were under functioning. I was running off of stress hormones and I was very estrogen dominant. I probably hadn't had a good amount of progesterone my whole life because, when we go through our menarche or when we first start our period or go through puberty, we often have anovulatory cycles usually the first year. And I can think back to as a child, I was chronically constipated. I always had gut issues. And so I think for me, starting puberty, I was we're very, as girls, young girls, were super sensitive to estrogen at that time. We're just super sensitive to hormones in general. And then you add in the chronic constipation, you're not detoxifying estrogen, and then going through kind of these anovulatory cycles. It takes a while to get really ovulating, usually the first year or two. I think I was just very progesterone deficient. And then, of course, I'm having the irregular periods. So then I get put on the pill and that suppresses my progesterone even more. Now I'm definitely not ovulating, definitely not making progesterone, which is what I needed in the first place. So that's really when I think my thyroid issues really began. And my metabolism just was getting worse and worse. And then emotionally, mentally, physically, I was not that healthy either. So I had a lot of survival-based patterns, lots of fight or flight, lots of stress. And I think in part, I think that does get imprinted on us while we're in our mother's womb. I think a lot of their emotional state and their hormonal state, I mean, it's been proven that having enough progesterone during your pregnancy really impacts the child's stress resilience in their life. And so I think a lot of us are in that same boat where most of our mothers didn't have enough progesterone. And so we're kind of stuck in these more fight or flight patterns. I think of this excerpt from one of Ray Peat's writings. That's why I just am so fascinated by Dr. Peat's research, because he just has dove so deeply into progesterone where nobody's really willing to do that. He's kind of writing like the importance of progesterone in pregnancy. And he says some recent animal studies are showing that prenatal progesterone increased body size, but even more, it increased brain size for an improved brain to body ratio. First, it was established that good prenatal nutrition produced big, healthy babies with big heads, high intelligence, and good disposition. Then experiments with rats showed that prenatal treatment with prolactin, which stimulates progesterone synthesis in that species, but blocks it in humans, produced large-brained, intelligent animals, 95th percentile for brain size and intelligence. It has since been established that a large brain is associated with a long lifespan. Prenatal stress produces many minor physical stigmata, and these have been shown to be associated with hyperactivity. Excess estrogen and other toxins and associated deficiencies reduces brain size and damages behavior. In animals, the effects of prenatal stress can be passed on to the third generation. Progesterone opposes estrogen and promotes prenatal nutrition. Katharina Dalton's studies of babies whose mothers received natural progesterone showed greatly improved intelligence. Another researcher, deliberately attempting to improve intelligence, claims his babies have a 200 IQ. Other investigators find that progesterone babies have strong, serene, independent characters. He goes on to say, there is an increasing recognition that prenatal conditions, whether good or bad, can be passed on to at least one subsequent generation. A reduced ability to produce progesterone is probably often a consequence of prenatal stress, which can lead to pregnancy difficulties in another stress-injured generation. He says, I feel that progesterone can reverse the trend toward more hyperactive and brain-damaged children, and that it can make a great contribution to the mental and physical health of future generations. And I read that because I find it really interesting, but also it would explain why so many of us right now just have such poor stress resilience in this generation. And so now that I know what I know about things like Hashimoto's and lupus, where a majority of sufferers are women, and there's a big kind of correlation between estrogen and these problems. And if you really dig into the deep research, if we have estrogen that's unopposed by progesterone, it can actually shrink our thymus gland. And our thymus gland is really important for regulating our immunity, helping with food sensitivities, our ability to interact with certain foods, our ability to tolerate certain foods, but also just immunity in general. And so I think of how many women right now are struggling with like things like Hashimoto's and lupus and stuff like that. And I know for me personally that it largely came down to that. And that kind of created a domino effect for my imbalance of minerals, my accumulation of metals. I was very undernourished. I think back into, junior high and high school, I was barely eating, and I was an athlete in high school. So I was definitely under eating. I was not eating enough calories to just sustain my activity, let alone my development. And we as women don't even stop developing until we're 25. So it's just insane to me. Like I think about all these diagnoses that I kind of spent a lot of time and wasted a lot of time chasing. When I first found out I had those things, I was like, oh, I need to go AIP. I need to go on the GAPS diet. I need to go keto. I need to go intermittent fast. I need to go carnivore. It was just me kind of jumping from more restrictive thing to more restrictive thing. And also me hopping on different supplements, trying different things, trying this, trying that, trying this, trying that, trying metformin, trying thyroid medication, trying this. I remember I even had a doctor that gave me supplemental estrogen because she probably didn't realize that estrogen can store up in the tissues. So to answer your question and go back to your question about just a nourishing lifestyle and eating, how this style of eating has been serving me lately, is I think a lot of my original issues were really from an imbalanced estrogen to progesterone ratio, a really stressed out nervous system, and simply just hypometabolism, being stuck in a really hypothyroid state, which puts the adrenals on overdrive. I can look back and see that so clearly in hindsight. And all of the things that I was chasing to suppress symptoms in reality was making those issues worse. But I was symptom suppression chasing. So I was looking for the symptoms to just go away, not really understanding the cost. So when I started to really focus in on my metabolism, not only did I have to kind of heal, but I had to heal from the things that I did to myself as well. I think I really underestimated the metabolic damage that I went through. And as most of us have found out, or at least I have found out, is that healing is a process. And so when I really started nourishing my body, I was just focused on the physical aspect of it, making sure I got the physical nourishment that I needed. And that was important because I had never mothered myself that way before. I'd never nurtured or nourished myself that way before. But what happens for a lot of us is once we get to a point where our cells are functioning a little bit better energetically, our cells are shifting because we're now providing our body with the protein, which is so important for metabolism, or the adequate amount of carbohydrates from the right sources or the right types of fats. We get to a level where our body is now demanding more of us, that now we cannot neglect or deny the parts of ourselves that have been shut down for so long. And I find that a lot of women go through this journey as much as I have, where nourishment, it's like the body doesn't stop there. That's where it starts. And then once we have enough energy in our cells, it's like our body is requiring us to face all of our junk. And I do think in a way, this is how, I don't really love the term generational trauma. I more like generational spells, because I feel like that's really what has happened is we've been just kind of under like generational spell after generation. But if we want to call it generational trauma, just for us to really like kind of more understand it, I think that for a lot of us, our bodies hold, as we looked at in the last episode, I think our bodies hold not just what we've been through, but what our mothers have been through and our grandmothers have been through. Our cells were present during our grandmother's life, which is crazy to think about. So I think that a lot of us, as we go through this nourishing journey, we start to nourish, our energy starts to rise, and then our body's requiring us to go deeper, harder. And it can be challenging, it can be kind of this up and down. There's this kind of roller coaster. So that's to say that nourishment is going to carry me through my life. The idea of nourishing my body and always making sure that I have adequate nutrition is never going to depart from me. I'm always going to carry that. I'm never going to change that. What that looks like from season to season is really different depending on what I'm working through and what I'm working towards. There have been times where I'm just in survival mode, like I'm very busy. I got to focus on certain things and prioritize certain things. And I'm focused on just making sure I eat enough calories. But then there's times where it's like, okay, I'm trying to really focus on my fitness, or I'm really trying to hit this certain fitness goal, or whatever it might be, right? I think it's really important for us to always be kind of rising up to meet challenges once our body is back in a resilient place. And I think we as humans have just like immense potential for overcoming amazing challenges. And if we don't have challenges in our life, we often create them. So I think for me, nourishing has been life-changing. I very rarely really suffer anymore. Obviously, there can be times in life where you're like, my health could definitely be a little bit better. But that usually comes down to our choices and the consequences of our choices and how we're treating ourselves. And are we getting enough sunlight? And are we getting enough sleep? And there are times in life when we just can't do those things. But I don't really feel like I really have those struggles anymore. I mean, I guess I always kind of have a touchy digestive system, but it's definitely so much more resilient than it was before, and it continues to get more resilient over time. But I don't really feel like those are really my struggles anymore. And I don't even really identify myself by them at all because I have gotten so far. But it has taken time, and that has not always been the case. There have been times where, especially when I first started shifting my nutrition and really focusing in on my metabolism, that it almost felt like it was getting worse in ways. But over time, I improved. And that's like the most important thing. And the thread that should be there is we should start to feel better. And if we aren't feeling better, then there's something that is not working for us. And I've also learned that as I heal, I have a little bit more resilience to things, which means I can let certain things leak in because I'm like, it's not going to really bother me. But too much of it, I definitely have a threshold for that. So I'm always kind of tweaking things and trying new things. And I'm kind of under the mindset too that the less restrictive you have to be, the better it is for your body. There's obviously just foods that don't work for some of us, like we just can't tolerate any. But then there's certain foods that are maybe worth implementing once in a while that I probably couldn't have implemented when I first shifted to a more metabolic supportive diet or the fully nourished way. So I definitely think it's always really important to be in tune with our bodies and mindful and not just kind of following a diet or following something word for word just because that's what somebody else says. Like, I really think that we need to be present in our bodies and our experience and also trusting our guts, because I feel like we as women know when something's right and when something's not right. And it's up to us to listen to that. But I also have learned that over time, your needs sometimes change depending on what you're doing and what you're focusing on. And, what I needed when I was first really nourishing my body, I don't need as much of anymore, or sometimes don't need to do it at all. So there's those things you kind of pick up and realize are really important for you to kind of create the quality of life that you want. And there's things that you're like, meh, I don't really see a big difference. So I'm not gonna waste my time or my energy. And that's kind of what this new phase of JAW is about, is really teaching you to tune into yourself and learn your nature. So you have the power to really see beyond the information overload that's out there and really figure out what applies to you and what works well for you and your body. All right, last question was, hi Jess, if you had to recreate Fully Nourished today, would you teach anything differently? This is a broad question, but it is something I have been curious about after seeing your amazing growth over the last couple of years. Also, can I just say how sweet and encouraging the way that she asked this question is? I just really appreciate it. I want to point it out because I think that we as women are all, we're all kind of on the same level in this weird social media world. I think some of us kind of like idealize influencers or idealize people that have a large following on social media. And I'm here to just like bring it back down and say we're all on the same level and we're all, as the women, trying to help each other rise. Just because we perceive that somebody has it better than us doesn't always mean that that's the case. And we're all just trying to learn and figure things out. And that's why I always always try to keep Jaw very community focused and community oriented, because I learn as much from you as you do from me. I also get as much encouragement from you as you do from me. And I take my responsibility, just having this platform really seriously, sometimes probably too seriously. And so when I hear feedback, especially if it's like put in a way that is kind of hurtful, I am not immune to it. I'm still human. And I'm like, oh man, that really hurt. I'm going to try to do better. Sometimes, we just have to fiercely hold our boundaries and say, no, I did what I was called to do, what I felt was right, even if it maybe didn't lay down the right way or didn't come across the right way. But sometimes, I really am very always interested in what you have to say. And I really try to respond as much as possible to your feedback and just your energy too. Like so much of the Jaw community just has like the best. We're always just trying to lift each other up. And I am so grateful for it. So when it comes to Fully Nourished, Fully Nourished, I originally created the first version of Fully Nourished in 2019. And then, wow, that's crazy to think about. And then I feel like I have my years mixed up. Sometimes I feel like I know I said earlier that I've been doing really committed to eating in a nourishing way for, I think I said 4 to 5 years. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, no, I think I've done this more for 6 to 7 years. That's crazy to think about. Oops. I kind of get sometimes I'm like, wow, I can't believe that much time has passed by. But I feel like I was really starting to research and dive in a couple years before I created Fully Nourished. And because at that point, I was still kind of stuck in the low carb, some ideas of low carb. I'd realized, okay, maybe fish oils are not the best thing. Maybe PUFAs are not the best thing. Maybe overloading on the vegetables are not the right thing. But I was really hesitant to be to say that carbs were good. I think that was the biggest hurdle that I had to wrap my mind around. And it took me a while from the time of research to actually implementing it in my own life. And when I was working with clients at that time, it was I remember I had one client who had been keto for a while, and she came to me and she said, I don't know. I'm still pre-diabetic and I can't even eat any less carbs. I think she was on something 20 net carbs a day. She was getting her carbs from cauliflower and green vegetables. And she was at the end of her rope and she was so desperate. And I remember saying well, this is the research that I have come across and I am just starting to implement this in my own life, but I don't know how you feel about it. Is this something that you would want to try? And she was just I trust you. I really want to just try anything at this point. And, I've always kind of taken that role, as a coach. I'm always kind of there to here, let me do let me do the research. Let me, if I don't know something, I'm very willing to say I don't know. Let's look into it together. Let's try to figure this out together. And she, I brought her the research and she said, let's try it. And I remember that was really the first person that I started to see her pre-diabetes started to back off. She started to become a little less insulin resistant. She started to ovulate again. And so this was over a course of months, right? It wasn't just instant, but she really responded well to more carbohydrates. And that was the first time where she was oh, I realized okay, this isn't just helping me, this is helping other people. And that was really when I started to educate that way. And then I got to such a point where women were I would love to work with you. And I just didn't have enough time in the day. So that's when I put all this information that I had learned into Fully Nourished. And that was in 2019. And then we kind of took feedback from original students. There's probably still OG students listening right now because our community is very loyal. And, we kind of have a core group that has always stuck around. And then I redid the course in 2020. And since then, really, I've focused most of my efforts in the community. I do the live Q&As on Thursdays, and we spend 2 hours together and answer questions in the community. And I've wanted to kind of wait before I redid a course or redid things because I really want to get enough feedback from women and really see what it is that you guys need and want, what your frustrations are, what challenges you're still trying to overcome. And so that's really why I haven't redone Fully Nourished yet. I still very much stand behind what I taught in that course. I think if I was going to do anything differently or teach anything differently, I think the biggest thing would be that I would want to expand a little bit more on how our physiology plays into our nature and how no matter what you're doing, you could do all the things, you could be doing all the physical things. But if you're putting such a demand on your system emotionally and you're trying to kind of fit yourself into this perfect box, you will never thrive. You could do all the things, but your hormones are really a reflection of how you're feeling and how aligned you're feeling in your body. And I feel like so many women who are in this space are trying to heal, whatever it might be. They're trying to fix their hormones. They're trying to do this. They're trying to, overcome their infertility. They're trying to heal their gut issues. And they get to a point where they almost are like in this constant mode of like, if it doesn't fix it, I'm moving on, and fix it, moving on. There's no real true commitment to, I need to understand, learn the whys behind why this is happening to me, and then slowly make the changes. And so I find that if, I would like to expand a lot more on our nature and our physiology and why it's so important to take it slow and gentle and relearn how to nurture ourselves. And I think also just as you grow, my teaching style has really changed and just grown. I think I would probably have a little bit of a different teaching style now than I do in Fully Nourished, mostly just because I've grown and changed. But also I think women respond a little less well to, of course, it's important for us to know the facts and know the physiology and the data, but it's also really important for us to hear stories and to kind of understand and really have those aha moments and make those connections. And so I think really just my teaching style would maybe be a little different. I think a lot of women, I was a lot more like logical left brain at the time. And so the way I present the information, I think for some women, if they're still stuck in there in that headspace, they can feel like they have to do everything really perfectly. And I had no intention to make it come across that way. I think it just did. And so a lot of women feel like, oh my gosh, I have all these things I need to do all the time. And I think in reality, it's more just kind of taking what works for you and leaving the rest and not stressing about the details as much as we love to stress about details. So I think my teaching style would be a little bit different. And then I think I would put a little bit more into the details of hormones, estrogen to progesterone balance. I think I would put a little bit more time into teaching about supporting liver detoxification. I think that's one of the biggest challenges that women face when they start to eat in a more metabolically supporting way. They start to move a lot of estrogen and their liver really takes a hit. And I think for a lot of women too, there's kind of this collective anti-fiber push in the pro-metabolic space. And I think for some women, everyone's different. Some women are like, oh, I have to do very little fiber. Or some women are very much intentional about the types of fiber. Like I can only do cooked apple fiber and fruit fiber. But some women actually do need a little bit more fiber, whether that comes from really, the key is proper preparation. So whether that comes from, well-cooked green vegetables or green vegetables tossed in like a vinegar and olive oil to kind of break down some of the cellulose, or maybe a really, really well-cooked, like steamed, Brussels sprouts or broccoli or cauliflower. Some women actually feel better when they have a little bit of fiber in their diet. The key is that's not where the majority of our nutrition is coming from. It more acts as like a complement to the diet. But especially when we're mobilizing estrogen or we feel like our digestion is really poor, like we need to experiment around with fiber a little bit and figure out what type of fiber we need and how much that we need of it. Even like some pressure cooked beans or soaked and sprouted, really long cooked beans and legumes. And for some of us, even some really well-cooked whole grains or grains, like, let's say sprouted oats or buckwheat or things like that work really well for our system. So there isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach. And so I think if I was going to go do it again, I would be a little bit more expansive with encouraging women to experiment with different types of food and kind of spending a little bit more time of education there. So There's a lot more I think I could say, but those would be like the main three things that I've noticed. Just the type of pressure that women put on themselves and how if they're still doing that, their physiology is going to respond with stress hormones. And then, just having a little bit of a different teaching style. And then, fiber. I think I would probably do a lot more expansion on fiber. And just, I think, trying to have women understand that you have immense capacity for resilience. You aren't always, if you're in a very burned out or imbalanced place, you're not always going to be there. And your nurturance now might be different than how you need to nurture yourself later. Once we get to a more resilient place, it's important for us to always be mindful and check in and conscious, but we might not have to baby ourselves as much or nurture ourselves the same way as we did when we were kind of nursing ourselves back to health. So just understanding that what works for me now might not always be the case. I might not always have to work this hard, or I might not always have to do all these things. And getting to the point where we understand that, yes, it might be hard now, but we're going to get through it, and not like, oh, I have a lifetime of these things to do. Like, it shouldn't be hard to keep our hormones balanced. Our hormones should be in a symphony, but in the modern world, it can be a little harder. But once we've gotten to that very hypometabolic state, it takes a little bit of nursing back to health. So making sure that that is really clear in the curriculum would also probably be a priority of mine, or making it more clear, I should say. So I really always love your feedback and questions. Keep them coming. Let me know how you like the Q&A style of episode. I do this every week with our private Fully Nourished community, student community, and I really enjoy doing Q&A styles. So if you like them, I'll keep doing them, but always open to your feedback. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Fully Nourished podcast. I hope you loved today's episode. And like I said earlier, please let us know. Let us know in the DMs what your biggest frustrations are right now as you follow a pro-metabolic approach or fully nourished approach. Is it fat loss and finding a healthy weight? Or is it gut health and overcoming digestive issues? Or is it more along the lines of burnout and kind of getting out of that place of burnout that so many of us are dealing with? Or maybe it's just trying to figure out what to eat and getting meal ideas. So let us know. We're always open to hear. And if you're looking to explore more about my ideas along the lines of our hunger for nurturance. I mentioned that today about how so many of us are starving for nurturance and that mothering that we didn't get, and kind of this explosion right now of women getting stuck in the vicious cycle of healing trauma. We're going to talk about all themes related to that in the next episode. So I hope to see you there, and I will see you soon. If I mentioned any links or resources in today's episode, they're always going to be linked in the show notes, which are in the description box below. And if you enjoyed the episode and want to support the podcast, please share it with others, share about it on social media, like this video, or subscribe to the channel. I really rely on amazing women like you in our community to spread the word, but I also really value your ideas about the podcast. So if you have any guests you'd like me to bring on or topics you'd like me to discuss, please submit those at jessicashwellness.com/podcast. If you want more content or you want to stay in the loop about new episode drops, please follow us on Instagram at jessicashwellness or sign up for our Sunday email at jessicashwellness.com/email-subscribe. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you soon.